Hello everyone, thank you for attending today. We'll commence the webinar in another minute or so it'll give time for you to grab yourself a quick drink. Thank you and speak to you all soon. Hello everyone. Welcome to our webinar today on how to quickly discover areas of IT overspend and risk. We have a high number of attendees today, so we've put all attendees on mute to reduce the background noise. Please feel free to type your messages into the chat facility. We have made time for a Q&A session at the end. The session is being recorded and we will provide a copy to all delegates. For those on the webinar who don't know License Dashboard, we're an IT management tool. We have provided services and technology to customers and partners over the past 20 years. On this session, we are also joined by EasySAM, who are co-hosting. EasySAM are one of our long-standing partners. My name is Andrew Potterton, and I am the partner manager here at License Dashboard. On the call today is James Bell, one of our SAM managers, Robbie Richmond, the managing director of EasySAM, and we also have Libby Bagley on the call, who is moderating the session and monitoring the questions box. So the agenda for today's session is as follows. The unspoken truth of SAM, the value of the health check, an overview of the health check report, next steps, and a question and answer session at the end. Over to you, Rob.
Thanks, Andrew. This is normally where I forget to take my microphone off mute and end up having a conversation with myself. So hopefully everyone can hear me okay. Good afternoon, everybody. As was introduced, I'm Robbie Richmond of EasySAM. We're a specialist software asset management company. Software asset management is all we do. We work with partners and tools like License Dashboard to provide organizations with effective and efficient SAM programs and the ability to, as has been identified by this this webinar, the ability to identify areas of risk and areas of overspend. And over the last, I don't know, probably 15, 20 years that I've been involved in this industry, what we've seen consistently is that organizations do have significant areas of overspend and risk. If we look at some of the sort of statistics that are out there, we've already identified through organizations like Gartner that companies and organizations typically spend up to 30% of their IT budget on software licenses, subscriptions, hosting, SaaS that they don't actually need, and at a time when finances are tight, that's obviously a potentially significant amount of money that they could reharvest and use for other purposes. We also see that not only are organizations, we know there's been an emphasis from software vendors and from some end user organizations to make sure they track their compliancy position, because they're worried about the risk of being under licensed and software vendor audits and all that. That actually occurs in probably about 30% of a typical company's software estate, but actually for about 60% of their estate, they actually have too many licenses, and that's equally a significant risk. We also know from experience that over the next 12 months, you're looking at probably a 60 to 70% likelihood of your organization being audited. And I would say that even with the current climate, that's probably even higher, because what we're hearing from some of the SAM and audit teams within some of the big software vendors is the fact that they haven't been able to do these activities over the last couple of months. And also, as organizations have changed the way they deliver IT services, particularly to support things like working at home, remote working, terminal services sessions, all that kind of thing, they see a significant opportunity there around conducting these audits. So we expect there to be an upswing in the number of software vendor audits carried out over the next 12, 18, 24 months. We also know that around 40% of businesses who have identified sort of a project or a program that relies on good quality data within their good quality IT data, that actually those initiatives fail to achieve what they're expecting because of the poor quality of that data. And so all of this really paints a picture of some of the key and obvious sort of benefits around making sure that we have effective software asset management in place. The next slide, Libby, please. So what are some of the difficulties that organizations have with SAM? Why is it that, in the 20 years that I've been involved in SAM, that organizations are still struggling with it? You would think by now we would be, a lot further down the line. Well, I think there's quite a few reasons for that. One of the obvious ones is the fact that software licensing is an ever-evolving area, and it can be difficult for end users to keep on top of the training, the certification, all of the changes that they need. So I've just listed on here a couple of the things that have happened over the last, I'm going to say 5 years in terms of licensing. We're seeing a huge swing towards subscription-based services, Office 365 or Microsoft 365, Adobe Creative Cloud, software as a service, platform as a service, infrastructure as a service, etc. All of these things really complicate the way that we adopt and apply our licensing, and they can make it even more difficult for as end users for us to be able to understand what is the most effective way of licensing our environment. And that creates an opportunity for software vendors to maybe help us or lead us down the path they want us to go down, as opposed to potentially what we might want ourselves. We're also seeing changes to things like virtualization, licensing by different metrics, whether it be processor and core, whether it be subcapacity, whether it be things like concurrent users. There's lots of different changes that come with all these different licensing regimes. And when you think that each vendor might have their own different set of licensing metrics, it becomes even more complicated. It's hard enough to manage, say, a relatively simple vendor for licensing like Adobe. You start to move into Microsoft, it becomes more complicated. You start to move into IBM and Oracle, and it really can be a really tricky area for people to keep on top of. So for sure, the fact that licensing is evolving so much can make it really difficult, and it can be difficult for organizations to keep the right skills and knowledge and maintain that in-house. And so that can be a real challenge. The next thing that we see is this idea that a lot of SAM tool vendors have promoted, where buying a SAM tool means you're doing SAM. And the truth is that SAM as a SAM tool is part of a program, part of a process that helps you to get on top of and control and manage your SAM environment. But it's not the answer by itself, in much the same way that somebody giving you the keys to a car doesn't mean you're able to drive. It doesn't mean you're able to get to your destination. And for quite a long time, SAM tool vendors have positioned their SAM tools as a bit of a silver bullet, and we know that that's not the case. And as you can see from the quote from Chris Petty at Gartner at the bottom, only about 25% of organizations that invest in a SAM tool will actually feel satisfied that the SAM tool is meeting their expectations. So that means that 75% aren't. And the main reason for that is because they're not investing in the other areas that they need to do. They're not investing in the people, the resources that are needed, and they're not investing in the SAM processes, making sure that the SAM processes they have in place, the workflows, the procedures, the policies, etc., are all strong and robust. And so the SAM tool by itself isn't going to deliver a significant amount of value. Next slide, please, Libby. The next thing that we see, and again, this is probably a really strong incentive and reason to look at something like the SAM health check, is the fact that it can be very difficult for an organization to say how they're doing with SAM. It's a bit of an open-ended question. You know, are you 20% of the way there, 50%, 100%? Well, how do you measure that? What are the metrics that you can sort of measure against? Well, there are some things that you can do. There are some metrics that we can look at, but there's also the ability to look at what other people in your industry are doing, what say certain processes you have in place, how mature they are, how many of those standard processes, there are industry standards for the processes around SAM adoption and maturity. And these are all things that we can help you to understand how you compare to, say, peer benchmarks or industry benchmarks. And that then follows on and leads you to a place where you can come up with a progression plan. So, okay, if I know that I'm halfway on my SAM journey, then I can identify what I need to do next. If you don't have that clear understanding, then it can be very, very difficult to figure out what the sort of next what the next path is. So that's my little bit. So with that, I think I'll hand back to James and Andrew. And as was mentioned earlier on, if there are any questions on anything that I've put on there, please feel free to use the chat box.
Thank you, Robbie. So the benefits of the health check. So as Robbie mentioned before, in this current climate where organizations are looking to reduce software spend and remove risk, an understanding of your software estate or estate in general is vital. So what is the health check? So the health check that we're providing is an it's an assessment of your IT estate to identify software optimization opportunities and the assets that basically you have within your infrastructure, and identify some risks. This activity is designed to be a light touch engagement, connecting to your environment either via our own agentless discovery tool or hooking in directly to your existing tools you have in place using our connectors. We will take all the data feeds and cleanse that data as part of this activity. Understand what software is due to go end of life and also due to expire from standard supports. Some of the key enabling you to make some business decisions on how to move forward with some of that software that you have out in your estate. You can also identify potential cost savings using our inbuilt software categorization, helping you to rationalize down unnecessary duplicate software usage that you have within your estate, and provide an overview of the assets and warranties you have in place currently. Okay, now to hand over to James to show you the reports.
Thanks, Andrew. So good afternoon all. My name is James Bell. I'm one of the SAM consultants that works within License Dashboard. I'm responsible for kind of the delivery of the health check report. I'm more involved with the number crunching and the actual analysis of the report. And I was actually the one that's kind of created this report and the ideology behind it. So just briefly to run through how License Manager and License Dashboard platform works. I've just put on screen there basically a small chart that demonstrates the data interfaces So I'll start with the center because that's probably the easiest place to start. So in the center, you see there we have License Manager. Now, License Manager is our tool, and what it has, and one of its unique features, is its ability to hook into a number of software inventories that you can see on the left-hand side there. So what we try to do is use existing tools rather than necessarily deploying new ones. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean that we don't have the ability or access to our own tools, but what it does mean is that with our tool sets and the way that we've designed the tool, it allows us to actually get up and running within businesses very quickly. And you can see there a lot of the most popular and the most used software inventories have a connector. There's just a few examples on there. You can see there we've got SCCM, Landsweeper, Snow, for example, Landesk, that kind of thing in the top left where we kind of inventory on our desktops and servers. But one of the key things that we try to evaluate when we do these health checks is how good is that information? And of course, cross-referencing multiple software inventories is key. For instance, with our virtual server estate, you can see there that we can pull in from VMware. You know, we take information from each of the vCenters and we can cross-reference that with where those virtual servers are sat in terms of their hosts and clusters, and then identify the licensing requirement off of that. Additionally, we also have the ability to take non-discovered data. So typically it's quite hard to pull back information on CAL consumption or indeed any RDS CAL consumption. And a couple of things that we look at is those non-discovered metrics and how to identify and pull that information in. And that's something that we manage really well within the tool. And finally, the big one, cloud and user. So as people move more towards DaaS, obviously we look to manage that licensing requirement in a specific way. With Office 365 as an example, obviously if you have an enterprise or an E3 SKU, you would be allowed to install and consume the Professional Plus or the click-to-run version of Office on up to 5 desktops. So from a license management perspective, obviously one of the things we want to identify is, okay, how many devices do my users have access to? Are there any users that are accessing more than 5 devices and are therefore uncompliant? And that is something that we do really well within the tool, and it's pretty much done automatically. All we need to do is identify the primary user of the devices, which is often available through our inventory tools, and we can quite quickly come up with a picture of our compliance position in terms of, say, for example, Office 365. There's other examples that we can look at, like the Creative Cloud through Adobe, where users are able to install on up to 2 machines, and that's another example of where License Manager can sort of automatically calculate your consumption. On the right-hand side, obviously another huge piece of the puzzle is the license entitlement. And one of the things that License Manager does is it's able to import a Microsoft licensing statement. So I don't know if many people have had access to a Microsoft licensing statement, but obviously there's a nice overall summary that you can view and understand your licensing position. But oftentimes, from a SAM practice point of view, it's better to understand the individual purchases. So License Manager will reconcile those individual purchases, going right back through to the original purchase and referencing each individual software assurance line. But you might ask the question why that's necessary, and it's a valid question. However, in some cases, there have been instances where companies have been allowed to purchase just software assurance on its own. And the knock-on effect is that the base license for that purchase was never made. So they may have, or it may reference on the license summary that they are entitled to a software, but in fact, it might be the case that the base license wasn't actually purchased. So that's something that License Manager does really well. In addition to that, we do, sorry, if you just go back to that's the one. So I was just going to speak briefly on how the platform works again. So we referenced License Manager in the beginning, but there's also the License Dashboard portal, which is kind of the web front end. and the License Dashboard Web API. Now, these two things obviously allow for the consumption of data, but the LD Web API allows you to utilize that data in other tools as well. So it's kind of a freedom of information between software inventories that we receive and also being able to use that information in other tools. So obviously LD Web API enables that. Next slide, please. So this really brings us on to the value of the health check. So I've just put a very simplistic picture on the screen here, which shows what looks like 3 inventory tools. The first one being Microsoft System Center, and you can see below there that I've referenced that there's 1,100 laptops and just over 1,200 desktops that are being managed by Microsoft System Center. I can see there that there are also 8 servers that are coming through. Now, obviously, looking at that information without cross-referencing it against other inventory tools, you might think that that's actually a full picture. But obviously, with SDCM, there is reports within there that show you potentially devices that are out there that don't have a client on. But what is the extent of that, and is there a way we can check that? Similarly, with our VMware vSphere or our vCenters, I've put in there that we have 12 virtual desktops and 450 virtual servers. Again, looking at that information and that narrow view, are we looking at a complete picture there, or is this just an isolated piece of information? Which brings us nicely onto the Active Directory. And obviously, Active Directory contains what we would say is a full picture of the estate in terms of being able to identify all of our assets that have ever touched the domain. And instantly we can see there that there is 2,100 laptops. Now, interestingly, across SDCM and vSphere, we only actually identified 1,100 laptops. So obviously there's quite a big gap there that we're missing of 1,000 laptops. Similarly, with our desktop estate, we can see there that Active Directory is bringing back 1,500 desktops. However, SDCM and vSphere combined with the actual physical and virtual desktops is a number much lower than that. So again, there's quite a large hole there that we need to patch. And then finally, with the servers, you can see that there's 800 within Active Directory, whereas we're only identifying 458 with our existing inventory tools. So are we missing a vCenter, or is there quite a significant portion of the server estate that we're missing? And this is something that we're really trying to identify with the health check reports, using those existing tools and identifying where the gaps are. Next slide, please. So I'm going to do a quick demonstration of the Check IT report. So I'll just show my screen. There we go. So on screen, you can see it's basically a Power BI report that we've termed the IT Insights report. It's a number of different slides. Within each slide, we've contained a number of different pieces of information. We've tried to make it as sort of overarching as possible so that we can include as much data in a short amount of time as we can. The idea behind this is we hook into existing inventory tools as well as AD to pull back a picture of the estate so that we can identify essentially where any gaps are. And straight away in the introduction page here, you can see that we are actually missing a number of devices within our inventory. And it looks like there's a significant portion there, just under a quarter, that is within our server estate. So as probably a lot of you know, the sort of higher cost licenses typically come through in your server estate. So instantly looking at this, in my total number of devices of 454, 12 are servers and we're missing inventory on them. So instantly, straight away, we know that we have a potential area of risk that we need to look at. Interestingly, while looking at this estate as well, just looking at the distribution of devices, we can see that with the most number of devices we might expect is our laptops, but there's also quite a large server estate. So looking at this, there could be quite a lot of virtual servers that are out there running, but instantly we could look at that and say okay, well, how are they licensing? If there's a lot of virtual servers or servers, is there some consolidation of costs that's available? With this amount of servers compared to laptops and desktops, I would ordinarily look at that and instantly say, okay, we need to maybe have a look at Windows Server core consumption and just see if there's any cost savings that can be made. Similarly, on the right-hand side within our operating system summary, if I filter this down by the total devices, we can see that the largest proportion of our estate is Windows 10 Enterprise, as is consistent with our classes on the left-hand side. But actually, there is a couple of areas of concern that we need to look at. So we have the Windows Server 2008 R2, which, as some of you may be aware, has actually gone end of life. So unless extended support has been purchased, we need to look at this and understand, okay, is there an upgrade path that we can follow, or is there some way that we can mitigate that support risk associated with that? Similarly with our Windows 7s, we can see that also Windows 7 has gone end of life. There's some, not a lot, that need to be upgraded. So again, from a sort of support perspective, we need to look at those and consider those. Obviously, from a business continuity perspective, the area to probably focus on straight away would be your Windows servers, as those probably support a lot more systems than some Windows 7 desktops. So it's an interesting one to look at, but definitely one that needs to be considered. So moving forward into our AD devices. So this basically looks at Active Directory and it tries to identify any gaps again. So of our total 454 devices that we identified through our inventory tools, there is actually 606 total AD assets. So it could be servers, desktops, printers, anything that's coming through in Active Directory, of which only 390 have logged in within 90 days. So interestingly, straight away, there's a hole there, and it's actually a discrepancy between what we were seeing within our inventory tool, thus highlighting the importance of having all of those inventory tools and the comparison between them. Additionally, there I can see that there is some assets that have been added greater than 10 years ago. So there's actually 10 there that are making up some of those devices. So is there some hardware refresh that can be made? And then finally, another area that I always highlight is the total number of disabled assets. So obviously from a cleanup perspective, we've got 129 that are sat out there. And what impact are they having? Is there potentially some laptops that can be reused, reharvested or repurposed within the business? Moving forward into the AD users, and this is one that a lot of customers are interested in, is we can see the total number of AD accounts. So even though we just had just over 600 total AD assets, there's 1,100 AD accounts. Now, obviously, these aren't all necessarily users. There could be service accounts that are running out there, but obviously 1,100 across 600 devices seems a tad high. And indeed, we can see in the top right that there is 457 disabled accounts. So it looks like in this specific company, there's been a policy in place to disable accounts rather than necessarily remove them completely. But obviously, as we've seen last week with Twitter, is there any concern with having those accounts out there? And actually, we can see within this estate there is actually a total of 27 domain admins, which again sort of just supports the idea that there's potentially some control that needs to be put in place over our accounts. If there's 27 total domain admins out there, and maybe half of those have been disabled, then maybe not too concerning. But actually, if there's 27 users that have domain access rights, then that could be potentially quite concerning. And obviously, with this IT Insights report, our overall goal here is to identify any gaps. But also with this, we're also seeing potential security risks that can be looked at. Additionally, we're also seeing here exchange license requirements. So is there a mailbox associated with the account? And in terms of those CALs that we were referring to before, this could give us a good indication of where we might require a license. So moving forward into disk utilization. So this is an interesting one in that it shows the devices that are utilizing a certain amount of memory across the estate. So in this case, I can see that we managed to scan 624 assets, and within those 624 assets, we can see the disk utilization. So actually, it looks like in terms of utilization across the estate, it's about 2/3 that has been consumed, and we have about 1/3 left over. But actually, there's 21 devices that are utilizing more than 80% of their memory. So from a desktop, it might be not too much of an issue from a business continuity perspective, but with servers, we have 9 that are utilizing more than 80% memory. So we need to look at that and say, is there any servers that are reaching the memory capacity? And could that affect our business continuity? Moving forward into end of life. So we touched on this briefly in the introduction slide, but this one actually is quite a big one, and one that we focus on quite heavily. I've just got Microsoft in this data set, but we do maintain end of life dates for a number of different data sources. And we can see within this specific data set that there is quite a significant number of the estate, or proportion of the estate, that's going end of life shortly. Indeed, there is some project professional that looks to be going end of life. There's 15 there. Is there some kind of upgrade path that we need to focus on to ensure business continuity with these products? Obviously, if it goes end of life, it doesn't mean that it's instantly useless, but it does mean that support for that product's gone. So we need to consider that. Microsoft modernity. So this refers to how old our Microsoft releases are, and in terms of their release ranking. So on the left-hand side, we can see a nice pie chart that shows our deployments by age of release. So actually, it looks like nearly under half of the Microsoft deployments are older than 5 years old. By clicking on that, I can see that that's filtered down my graph on the right-hand side. And I can see that actually 8% of those software that are older than 5 years are within the last 2 software releases. So is this a software that's potentially been discontinued, and how does that impact? Obviously, just seeing these charts in isolation isn't so helpful. Having the data behind it kind of gives us a bit more context as to where those software installs are affecting our estate. But this just gives us a nice view of what or where potential issues are. I can see that there is some upgrade paths available here. For instance, there's 4.28% that are greater than 5 software releases behind. So there's definitely some upgrade path available for some of those software deployments that are older than 5 years. So moving forward into product categorization. So the product categorization is something that we like to focus on, in that it allows us to see potential contract consolidation opportunities. It could be that there's a product that's gone end of life, and we need to understand what our options are in terms of other softwares that are available. If I click into a specific example here, we can see that with my security and protection software, I can see that there's a number of different softwares that are already deployed across the estate. But crucially, are we paying for these across different contracts? Is there some consolidation that could be made to reduce that cost? What's the most deployed product to allow us to install some, understand some kind of consolidation with that? Instantly, I can see that Sophos antivirus has been deployed by the look of it. And there's also KnowBe4 Fish Alert. So maybe these are 2 that have been deployed across the estate. But there's also some malware bytes that are out there, and some other potential softwares that we need to look at and potentially consolidate and reduce cost on. One thing I will note on that area is that our tool does categorize and cleanse all of that data. So when you're, say, for example, looking at the reports, there will be a category title against each software, and there is a description that kind of describes each one. So when you receive one of these reports, if you opt to get the IT Insights report, you will be able to kind of look into that data and interrogate it yourselves to see exactly if there's any consolidation options out there. Moving forward into warranty. So having an active warranty on your devices is quite important, as obviously without that warranty, if that device fails, then you're kind of out there on your own in terms of being able to manage the asset and the support for that asset. So in this case, we pulled back asset information for Dell and Lenovo devices. We're looking to extend it to HP currently, but we're just working on getting the API working for that. But what this shows us is that within this specific customer estate, there is 101 devices that are currently out of warranty. By clicking into that, though, you can see that actually the vast majority of those are or were purchased within the last 2 years, potentially. So in terms of the device itself, maybe not too much of a concern or risk, because from an age perspective, it's not that old. But again, from a warranty perspective, what are our risks in terms of support with that? The final slide to look at is security. So we scanned to see when the last scan was done for antivirus. And we can see in this specific estate that there hasn't been a scan since November of last year. So obviously quite a large issue there, and that we're not up to date with our scanning. So that is something that we can identify straight away with the scanning of the tools that we've got. So it's quite interesting in looking at that, as obviously it highlights quite a big area of risk that we need to look at. And you can see through the health check report that it's quite overarching and all-encompassing. You know, we've gone right through the security of the devices, the age of the devices, what software is end of life, what software could potentially be consolidated. So with this report, you get quite a lot of information that can make a lot of informed decisions for you, and indeed any gaps that are available within the estate. So that brings that demonstration to the end. Obviously, if you've got any questions, then please put them in the chat, and I'll be happy to answer those. But I'll pass back to Libby, who will be able to share the rest of the presentation. So over to you, Robbie.
Okay, thanks, James. So that was really thorough. Thank you. So I think the key thing from what you guys have seen is that the SAM health check basically will give you really critical, really detailed information on the software that's in use within your estate. So it'll give you installation information, including version and edition, enhancing what you get potentially through any existing audit solution. It'll give you end of support reporting. It'll give you any non-standardization in terms of software titles that you've got. It'll give you this breakdown of your environment by category. So as James showed, the different antivirus products, etc., and help you to really focus and create a sort of a rationalization plan. It'll give you detailed software data by vendor, which can be used for your next true up or renewal or upgrade planning, whatever it is you want to do. And as was shown by James, it also highlights where you might have some particular security risks. What we've wrapped around the health check is a review of SAM processes and policies. So looking at what policies and processes you have in place and whether they align with some of the industry best practice, whether that be ITIL or ISO 19770. We'll also help with a report on your SAM maturity. So going back to what I mentioned earlier on, comparing where you're at on your SAM journey with maybe some of your peers or some industry sort of standards, and also a brief recommendations report. So outlining some of the key things that as an organization you might want to focus on that will help to drive and enhance the value that you get from your SAM program. And all of these things are really designed to provide you with really trustworthy, reliable data, and to help you start making some meaningful and sort of beneficial decisions on the back of that. We see that as being quite important. So next slide, please, Libby. So this is something that we're offering effectively free of charge. So for organizations who want to take a look at the health check, my contact details or the EasySAM contact details are on there. If there are any questions, please feel free to as I pop those into the chat. I think the experience that we have with the health check and the enhancements that License Dashboard have done to the inventory data that's provided, and coupled with the sort of process and best practice review that we've wrapped around it, certainly our experience has been that it's well received and definitely helps organizations to progress their SAM adoption and their SAM maturity and get more value out of that quite quickly to really accelerate that. So if it is something that you'd like a bit more information on, please feel free to contact us. Our details are on the screen. Libby, I think I'll hand back to you for any questions.
Brilliant. Thanks, guys. Thanks, everyone. That was a really great session and fantastic offering that we have available to everybody on this webinar. We will be sending the recording out so you can access EasySAM's contact details and claim your report following today's session. We have had a few questions across here, and if there are any more, please feel free to use the chat box on the right-hand side of the screen. So the first question we've had is, does License Manager remove duplicated data if you're using multiple data sources to build the report?
Yeah, I can take that one. So yeah, thank you for the question. It does remove any duplication. So what we try to get towards is obviously having as much of the data as possible, but also having the best quality data. So within License Dashboard, we've spent many years identifying which inventory sources are the best in terms of different pieces of information, whether it's calls and processes for each device. And what it does is it handles that automatically for you. So yes, it does remove any duplication that comes through.
Fab, thank you, James. We've also had another one. How do you manage custom metrics?
Oh, I'll take that one as well. So within License Manager, you can manage custom metrics. It's as simple as changing the metric for a piece of software on an asset. So it could be that you have a server that is licensed through the core based metric. So all you do is change the metric and it automatically calculates the number of core licenses you would need.
Fab, thanks, James. We've had another one here which might possibly be for you as well. Which source have you used for creation of the reports in Power BI?
So the reports in Power BI utilize Active Directory data. They utilize any existing inventory tools for assets and users. So in this specific example, I've used SCCM, I've used vCenter, and I've used Scanwin.
Brilliant, thank you. We have another one here. Is it possible to use the data in this free review for a follow-up service?
I can probably take that one. It's nice to feel like there's a question that might be directed my way as opposed to the James show. So yes, absolutely. So the idea behind this is to probably give an organization just a clear understanding of what their accurate baseline should look like. We can then have a conversation about what you want to do with that, and that might include helping to negotiate things like software renewals, true ups. It might include looking at a managed SAM service going forward, particularly if there are significant savings to be made. That can be a very sensible path for organizations to take. It can be focusing on, okay, so I've got this data, what do I actually do? What are the steps I need to do to start to see some value from the service? So all of those things, we can certainly use this data as a springboard to kind of launch some of those other activities.
Brilliant, thank you, Robbie. So that's all the questions that we've had in so far, but if you do have any more questions, please feel free to contact License Dashboard or EasySAM and we can get back to you after today. Thank you to everyone who's joined us on this webinar. We hope that you've enjoyed it, and this is a really good opportunity to get a free IT report, especially if you've had any changes during the last few months with working from home rather than within the office. Thanks to our panelists as well for presenting.